situation where it isn't, where it is again livable and is fit for purpose, then they will not be able to be exempt under this clause. And I think that is serious and unfair. And I think this issue needs to be rectified by the Minister before this bill is enacted, so it doesn't allow it to fester. I welcome the exemption for the properties used by charities, and there is some detail that we need to tease out at committee stage in relation to that there. Section 6 allows for relief on renovations made by disabled residents. And this is an amendment that I brought forward at committee stage last year when the original Act was going through. It was dismissed at that time. And I just don't think this is the way to do politics. If there's a good, sensible proposal made by the opposition, then it should be at least considered by government. And I acknowledge that you have considered it, but at the time you should have said that this is sensible. Let's look at that there. And I do welcome the fact that this is included. This is a very serious issue, but I have serious concerns of what you've done, because you haven't gone far enough, and I say that genuinely. If you look at this exemption, what it means is it's linked to homes that were adapted who received housing adaptation grants or housing disabled person in essential repair grants. Now, this is the problem with this, and there's an additional problem that I'll talk about in a minute. But the problem is, for many people, as you know, those grants are means tested. So certain people didn't get those grants. Certain people who the mother and father were maybe employed, maybe in the construction industry, maybe in a shop or in a bank or whatever, had a son or daughter who had a serious accident, who were required to adapt their house. In some cases that I know myself, it means that you have to build on an additional room, you have to build on an additional bathroom, you have to maybe have entrance into your house changed so that it's, a wheelchair can get in, you have to change the door frames, you have to do all of that, lower shelves, the whole thing, depending on what age, if they need to be self-capacity, there might be a kitchen required, and all of that, which cost a substantial amount of money. But because the husband was working in the construction industry and the wife might have been working in the bank, which maybe now, today, that both of them could be unemployed, that they're not entitled to this deferral, that the value of what they did, the 40 or 50,000 euro that they potentially could have spent to adapt their house so that their child could live, could be accommodated in their own home, will be taken into the chargeable value of their house, because it is based on the ability of having a grant. The second thing is that even those who did get a grant, it was based that those grants are based on a tiered structure. So it depended on your income, even if you came into the threshold, that you would get a portion of the grant. And what you've done in this section is you've basically said that the adaptation, so let's look at a 50,000 euro adaptation to a house, but if the maximum grant that you were able to get was 12,000 euro, then the chargeable value that you can deduct from the house is 12,000 euro, despite the fact that it cost you 40 or 50,000 euro to adapt your house for your son or your child. Sorry. And finally, on this here, and I'll deal with some of this more in committee stage, is, for example, a mother and father who have been separated. And let's take the same child who is disabled and needed the additional room. And the mother and father have equal access. Of course, the father would have to do the same thing that the mother would have to do, but the father's adaptation to his property would not be included under this here. The exemption wouldn't be included because it is stated that it has to be where the child permanently resides. So there's all issues like that there. There's also issues in terms of local authority housing that we're completely opposed to, that the local authority houses would be included in this tax. But Minister, you've made a very unpopular tax more unpopular. The snitch clause is completely unacceptable. It is not right that you're asking citizens of this state to inform on their neighbours. That is what the revenue is there for. Let citizens comply with this tax if they so wish. It will be the law of the state for them to comply. They will have to put in the value when they buy the property. It will be up to the revenue to make the calculations that somebody else has under-declared. It is not right to impose legally a penalty on people if they do not snitch on their neighbours. The whole issue, Minister, in terms of deferral of payments, is nothing more than a sop. Look, there are two people who can't afford to pay this charge. Those who you've recognised as not being able to pay will be given a prize of 4% interest. But those who then, the second group, who can afford to pay, or who can't afford to pay but who haven't been recognised by you because they're deciding to pay their mortgage or whatever first, what will happen to them is they'll get an 8% interest charge. And I've listened to, I had a meeting with a young lad, he's a Garda recently, his wife's a Garda, and they were talking to me about the impact of the Crow Park Nua deal on them and the impact it would have. And they talked about they're living in Dublin, have a big mortgage here in Dublin, they pay huge management fees for their house. They're getting by. They're able to pay their mortgage, right? Crow Park is going to hit them hard. They believe that they'll be able to get by. But do you know how they're getting by when you tease it out? They've got a young child, under a year of age, but they can't afford childcare. If they had to put the child into childcare while they are working, then they wouldn't be getting by and they would be in mortgage arrears. But what they're doing is they're working back to back. One comes out, hands the baby to the other one comes back in, gets the baby back. And that is what's happening for some of these families who are just getting by, that you don't recognise, that you still believe have an ability to pay this tax. But they're prioritising everything else above going into default. Minister, people want to pay their taxes. People want to be abiding by the law. But I believe that a huge amount of people will, and the vast majority of people will do this because they want to comply, particularly with the revenue. But there are people who simply will not be able to, that you are going to force into be in non-compliance with the revenue, and allowing the revenue to dip into their bank accounts, into their social welfare, is completely unacceptable. Sinn Féin will be bringing a repeal bill to this legislation, and we would ask you, even at this late stage, to reconsider this and come up with a more fair way of bringing the revenue stream into the state, reducing our deficit, but not imposing this hardship on families right across the state.
Good morning, Oireachtas. I now call Deputy Brian Stanley. There's 8.5 minutes left.
8.5 minutes. Thanks, Lescan Corley. We're in here today, Minister, because you rushed through the legislation here in December, literally in the last sitting of the Dáil before the Christmas break. The bill put through then was fundamentally flawed, and this is fundamentally flawed. And it's a sign of desperation, I believe, that the ink was barely dry, that we're back here now again, already having to amend it, when we should be actually shredding it. But in the rush to guillotine December's debate, you forgot about the exemptions for properties used by charities, pyrite induced damage to homes and renovations for the disabled. And you also proposed the local authority housing to be treated at the lowest value of 100,000. Section 7 of the bill outlines in your attempt to put a positive spin on these exemptions. You managed to turn reality into a virtue. Value in local authority houses, and you know this and your officials know this, value in local authority houses in the first category. That's where they are, except maybe for some in parts of the city. In 25 counties, they're not worth over 100,000. In the town I live in, the capital town of the county, they're valued at an average of 60,000. I have seen local authority houses and ex-local authority houses being sold for 22,000, and I can give you details of that in the last number of months. That's the facts of it. So in 25 out of 26 counties, that's the reality, and you're turning that into a virtue. The same in South Kildare, the same in Offaly. So the amendment, you know, is simply doing that. It's just turning that reality into a virtue. The whole issue of the snitch clause has been mentioned. And I could have just said this to you, that revenue are proposing to value the house. That's what it says in the first bill. Revenue will value the house. It sends you guidelines. So the person who, if I'm buying the house off Michael Noonan will have the house valued using the guidelines of revenue. But now what you're attempting to do is to get the purchaser of the house to record and to let revenue know if the house is worth more. But the value has already been done, and I think that's shameful to try and turn one person against another in a situation like that, where it has already been valued. You know, it's literally putting one person against another. In about 11 days' time, householders you'll be assessing them, and the letters will be hitting the floors in a lot of hallways. And I met people last night in Great Cullen, in Laois, people who are concerned about this, and I'm telling you that, you know, previous Speaker Pearse Doherty spoke about 2 guards. I spoke to people last night who have take-home pays of €300. They're working. These people are working. You know, these people some of them had €350, €360 a week take-home pay. There's a couple of people there who are disabled, and they are absolutely in dread of this. So this was wrong back in December, and it's still wrong. And no amount of amendments, and we will put in amendments to try and knock the rough edges off it, but no amount of amendments will change that fundamental fact. And that's what's wrong with this bill from the start. There's absolutely no consideration taken of ability to pay, except that you be loaded with either a 4 or an 8% interest rate every year. The bill also gives the power to social protection to deduct. But what you didn't look for from social protection was for social protection to poverty-proof the bill before you introduced it. And such a study would have had regard to the impact of this bill on people such as the ones that I have mentioned, people on low incomes and people who are struggling. The effects on the family home tax would cause people to be deprived, and this is the key issue, of essential items that have been identified or that would be identified in a survey. You know, that is the key issue, and that hasn't happened here. So I would urge the Minister to have regard to such a study, at least to do that before commencing the bill. I'd appeal to you to do that, and I'm saying that to you very honestly. And I would challenge the Minister to have the courage to do that, and have the conviction to do it, and to carry out that exercise. But shockingly, this bill amending the property tax, we haven't got any. It contains no waivers, no exemptions, and no way out. You're trapped. The millionaire will pay the same as a pauper. The lone parent will pay the same as a millionaire. And again, I must strongly advocate exemptions or waivers. And the waivers should include people who are in low-income households, such as on job seekers allowance, one-parent families, supplementary welfare allowance, family income supplement, the lowest social welfare payment in the state, €186 are not even exempt. Pharmacists, old age pensioners, recipients of occupational pension, people who are on the invalidity pension, disability allowance, disability benefit, and blind people, they're not exempt. No one's exempt in this. And at a very minimum, we should exempt those people from those. What you've done here is that you've gone for the soft option, and you've imposed a tax on homes. You haven't imposed a tax on wealth, because you're putting the tax on local authority houses. The person living in it doesn't own the house. So you're putting a tax on something that isn't actually a property belonging to the person, and that's the key point here. Somebody who's in negative equity, they haven't got property. They have a millstone around their necks. That's what they have. And the tax, this tax by its very nature is absolutely going to hurt people in low incomes. And I can't tell you, I'm sure you're meeting them as well, but people I've met in recent months are absolutely in trepidation of this. Back in December, we gave you choices, and we should do that. We set out alternative proposals for the budget. We called it making the right choice, and we spelled out exactly how the books could be balanced without implementing this home tax. We outlined new tax measures to raise €2.7 billion that wouldn't have affected low and middle income groups, such as a third rate of tax of 48% only on portions of income over 100,000. We set out the proposals for a wealth tax, which would exclude working farmland and the family home up to €1 million, and we had other exemptions in it. We set out measures such as standardising all discretionary tax relief, which would have raised substantial funding, and a tax on betting. Now, a lot of people mightn't like that, but I would rather see a tax on betting than a tax on someone's family home, like the people I met last night. And I think if you think about this, Minister, surely that would be a lot fairer.
We have 2 minutes remaining, Deputy. Go on with.
Thanks, John Corley. We outlined where savings could be made, and our savings brought in €1.044 billion. So we're not saying, Sinn Féin doesn't believe that savings can't be made, but you have to do them in a sensible way. And these savings were outlined across the health sector and other parts of the public sector, such as the replacement of drugs, branded drugs with generic substitutions. But hiding behind, and this is what the government is doing, is hiding behind the Troika on this and blaming Fianna Fáil. And sure, it was Fianna Fáil's conceived the idea of this house tax, because you weren't in favour of it, as previous speakers said when you're in opposition. And now you're saying that, it's part of the agreement. It's part of their agreement, but you got a new mandate. You got a huge mandate right around to here, that much of it all. That's how much you have of a mandate. And, you're setting out to deceive the public by telling them that you must do this because of the Troika. So you have choices. And we know some of those choices mightn't be easy. You know, you can't pull rabbits out of a hat. I'm not going to pretend that you can pull rabbits out of a hat, but there are choices. Those choices should be taken. And just in relation to the exemption in Section 2 for the disabled, the problem with that, Minister, is that the cost of the adoption of the house has to be quarter of the value of the home. A lot of the adoptions have been carried out. I've dealt with ones at constituency level that only cost €4,000 or €5,000. Some of them only cost 3,000, maybe a stair lift. So you know you're not going to get to the people who it affects. And I would just appeal to you. You know, the other issue that you must take into consideration is the services. The services in the county I live, we pay for them all already. Refuse collection was privatised in 1985. We pay for it. We pay fire charges. We pay ranges of charges. A whole range of others have been completely privatised. You know, and that's the difference here. You know, that and the fact that you're going to screw low-income households. You know, you're going to screw people who cannot pay. They just can't pay. I've seen people. I see the effects this is having on their physical and mental health, and it's shaking them. And I'm saying this to you honestly. You know, when this comes through the letterbox, and they also know that there are water charges coming next year. Once you have the local elections out of the way, they know what's coming and they know what's in front of them, and it's not fair. And I would just ask you to revisit it again.
I now call on Deputy Catherine Murphy, sharing with Deputies
Richard Boyber, Joan Collins and Claire Daly. All of us would love to have a lot more time, but the guillotine is obviously being imposed, and it's been imposed to allow the Revenue Commissioners to send out tens of thousands of letters to people that are already, or most of them are prepared at this stage. The reason also that there's no vote today is because the government don't want to debate this bill. They're providing time to what they see as the necessary evil, otherwise known as the opposition. While most of the bloated government head out to do constituency clinics and attend local events. There's only 3 slots filled at the moment, or to be filled by government at the moment, and that says it all. And that, to me, looks like a very cynical exercise in trying to conclude before 3:30. And the kind of thing that I said about the constituency clinics is the same kind of parish pump politics charge that is singled out for the like of those of us who are independents, where we can see that it's clearly happening on the government side. The bill is intended to amend a bill that was just enacted before Christmas, which shows that the process was a failure. It was shoehorned into December to have it passed before Christmas, and one reason only was that it was done for that reason, and that was to get the backbenchers home for Christmas and make sure that they couldn't be got to during the Christmas recess. Now, this is an abuse of process. And a second abuse of process is the general election, where people clearly felt they were given an option in Fine Gael that said in their manifesto that they did not intend to do this. Apart from the resistance to the tax on the family home, which in itself does not produce any wealth, key concerns with this tax are about ability to pay, fairness, what the tax is to be used for. And I believe the tax fails on all levels. The Fine Gael manifesto acknowledged all 3 of those when they highlighted people who were asset rich and income poor, like pensioners. They highlighted the negative equity generation who had paid huge amounts of stamp duty. Many of them only own a debt at this stage. They highlighted the need to reform local government and remove wastage. That's what your manifesto says. So what are we being asked to pay for? The motor tax fund from 1997 was ring-fenced and used as a key component of the local government fund. We now have a shortfall in the local government fund. Why? Between 2009 and 2013, 534 million has been withdrawn from that fund. The property tax is expected at best to take in 500 million, so that knocks on the head any chance of any additional services being provided. Last week, Minister Hogan, when opening the debate on the Motor Vehicles Duties and Licences Bill 2013, says, and I quote, "In 2012, 46.5 million of motor tax income was transferred from the local government fund to the Exchequer. This year, an amount of up to 150 million will be similarly transferred. These are necessary measures towards the reduction of the national debt." Unquote. So let's be clear, what's occurring here is not about a property tax. That's the label that's been put on it, but in fact, it's a tax that's about funding the national debt. Given the impression that the tax is going to provide extra services such as parks maintenance, leisure services or street cleaning is just pure nonsense. So other countries do impose property tax. I have friends and family that live in other countries. In France, for example, one of my friends, we had a discussion about the property tax that they pay, and they said it's the imposition is worth it for the return that they get. It funds summer events for their children on a daily basis. It funds child and elder care. They have a local police service. They have ongoing urban improvement. They have leisure facilities and services. The list goes on and on. This government are quick to point to other countries. However, the services I've just highlighted are either not provided in this country or people pay for them separately. So it's fair to ask, what are people getting for this tax? It's one reason why the tax will be hated, because it's simply a replacement tax that is being used to fund the national debt. No developed country that is serious about proper local government goes about imposing a tax in this way. Local representatives vote for local taxation measures, and the money stays in the locality. We have it, of course, backwards. The current system of distributing the local government fund is already wildly unfair. Yet the Minister is set to retain 35% of the property tax to be used as an equalisation fund to distribute as he sees fit.
Just 2 minutes.
Thank you. The historical development of local government in this country is one of control. It's about a very centralised system, and it really is a reflection of the 19th century. You know, if we were to look at and exploit the best attributes of Irish people and build them into our local government system, I think we would end up with a different type of politics. But we're not seeing any of that type of reforms. Reforms have been piecemeal and timid at the best. I'll have to cut a whole lot of things that I wanted to say out because of time, which I hope is not going to be available later when it's not going to be available to us because the government are not filling slots. I've tabled a number of amendments. One of the area in relation to pyrite. Minister, would you buy a house in an estate that there was proven pyrite? No, you wouldn't. They should be excluded from this tax on the same basis as unfinished estates. This notion that they're going to have to pay maybe €1,000 to prove that they have pyrite in order to get maybe a reduction of 300 or 400 is an absolute nonsense. The people with disabilities, I don't think if you realise the way the fund is it's different in each local authority area. Some means tested, some don't, and to have got a grant from a local authority. I know if you're bedridden in Kildare, you won't get a grant. You know, if you have somebody looking after you in the house. So look, this is a nonsense to put that kind of proviso on it. That's the kind of thing that at the very least should have been teased out so that we can see the difference in the detail in relation to the different local authorities. I would have liked to say some positive things about how we might reform local authorities, but in the absence of having time, that'll have to go for another day because I don't want to eat into the time of the others.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you.
Call Deputy Richard Boyd-Barrett, 7.5 minutes.
Thanks, Lasceann Corla. Yes, Lasceann Corla and Minister, just like Deputy Murphy, I want to protest in the strongest possible terms about the imposition of the guillotine. There are many more of us who would like to speak very considerably longer because there's a lot in this bill. And we had a display of political cynicism from the Taoiseach when he was questioned about this matter yesterday, which really beggared belief, and government TDs chortling in their seats about how they could play the PR spin game and a refusal on their part to actually acknowledge the very serious protest that we were making about the imposition of this guillotine. And this government, after making all its grandiose claims about democratic revolution, transparency, new kind of politics, has now established an absolutely clear pattern. If a bill is controversial, if the government think it's going to face serious opposition, that bill is guillotined. If a bill is uncontroversial, it will be let run for days. That's the game you're playing. Now, to be honest, I don't know why you aren't ashamed of yourselves for that level of manipulation. It's really scandalous. I mean, it's bad enough that this country is in the hole that it is in. It is bad enough that people are suffering in the way they are. It is bad enough that you are planning to increase that suffering by imposing this charge on hundreds of thousands of ordinary householders. But the fact that you refuse even to allow proper debate and scrutiny of those measures is absolutely shameful. But I have to say, you have honed your skills in media manipulation and PR very well. And it's a pity, you know, we don't live in the world of the Matrix, where perception is reality, because if we lived in that sort of bubble, in the virtual reality bubble, which it appears this government lives in, the media virtual reality bubble, where you think if you say something enough, it becomes reality, it would be great. But you see, when you actually walk outside of this house and this bubble, and you walk into the estates and the towns and the villages and talk to ordinary people on the street, they can see through all this virtual reality, media spin and manipulation, because they have to face the harsh, cruel reality that they have no job, that their income has been slashed, that they don't know how they can manage their bills, that they can't pay their mortgage, that they are terrified for the future of their children, that they are at their wits' end about their capacity to survive. In many cases, I mean, to hear the heart-wrenching stories of IBRC workers, ordinary workers, not the management, yesterday, people who'd worked all their lives, paying taxes, and at the end of it, to discover via television that their jobs are gone, that they will walk away after 50 or 60 years of employment with €13,000 of a payoff, and don't know how they're going to pay their mortgage. That was one story we had yesterday, a man in his 50s who hadn't depended on social welfare for one day in his life, and now in his 50s doesn't know if he can pay his mortgage. That is an appalling reality that people are facing. And on top of that reality, you now want to impose a charge of hundreds of extra euros per year that people simply cannot pay. And all the spin and manipulation of the democratic process will not mask that reality. And it will not prevent the rage, the anger, and the despair that people are feeling faced with that reality. And it's about time that we finished with the myopia that this government seems to suffer, and face the reality that you are asking hundreds of thousands of people to do something that is simply not possible for them. They can't pay. 200,000 children living in poverty, and their parents, their families suffering that poverty. How do you expect them to pay? And we've asked you that question time and time again.
2 minutes remaining.
People who can't pay their mortgages, how do you expect them to pay? And it's not just those that are directly affected and unable to pay. I mean, I just laugh when I hear you say, this is better than increased income taxes because that will be a tax on jobs. As if there's two different realities. As if there's the reality on which you get your pay packet, and then there's another reality back in your house where somewhere there's a mysterious source of money in the back garden. There isn't. There's no money trees growing in the back of people's homes. So where are they supposed to get the money? Or the incredibly depressing, strangling effect of all of this on the rest of the economy. Do you not understand that? Do you not see what this is doing? That every euro you take out of the pockets of people who already can't pay their bills is another nail in the coffin of the domestic economy that is being absolutely suffocated. And your deferrals are a joke, an absolute joke. Deferrals for people who may be in insolvency arrangements. So they're strangled with debt. They're forced into these arrangements because of the activities in banks, and as soon as they get out of it, they'll have accumulated another debt because of the property tax that you're imposing on them. Offering a future vista of misery for years to come for hundreds of thousands of families. The alternative, we keep saying to you, Minister, and you refuse to even debate it seriously, just like you don't want the debate here, is why can we not tax those sectors of society who you refuse to touch? The corporation tax. I mean, unbelievably, I got an answer from your department today on corporation tax saying you could not calculate the effective corporation tax rate. Now, when I ask you about the effective income tax rate, you give me the answer. It's simple. Gross income, tax paid, what is the percentage of the latter as a proportion of the former? That's the effective tax rate. But when the same question is asked about the corporation tax rate, where it is clear, using that methodology, that the effective corporation tax rate in this country is 6.2%, half of what you claim it is, that the corporations you refuse to touch, who could be hit for further taxes to save the suffering of ordinary people, you say, sorry, we can't calculate it.
Deputy, I have to ask you to
That's
conclude,
rubbish, Minister.
to let your colleagues...
Yes, sorry. So, be fair. Be fair to the economy, be fair to those who are suffering. Tell the truth, allow for a real debate, and begin to consider taxing those who can actually afford it rather than those who are being crippled.
Deputy Joan Collins, 7.5 minutes.
Last Count Caller, I too want to, in the strongest possible voice, oppose the guillotine that's been put on this debate. Because I think we have to look at what sort of country we actually are. For decades in this country, decades, successive governments actually had a policy of encouraging people to go on to the mortgage ladder. That was the drive of the last number of decades. People were situations that I would have been in 1989. I was renting a two-bedroom house down in Kilmainham. It was costing about £980 a month at that time. And to get when an opportunity came up to buy a house in Inchicore, it was 31 grand, and the mortgage was 1,100. So in essence, then that was the mortgage interest relief was brought into that. So it brought it down again too. So it was worth your while looking at buying a home. And governments brought in not only the tax relief incentives in mortgages, they brought in a tax relief in the 90s in relation to properties in the city and the apartments, all that sort of thing, to try and get people in to buy their own homes, to buy their own apartments, to buy into this property thing, rather than encouraging a healthy rental system and a strong rental system where tenants and landlords had rights, where there was proper accommodation that wasn't run down. We've all experienced a horrible rented stock in this city, private rented stock. We're seeing probably the starts of that now with the local authorities in the inspections on the South Circular Road, where apartments were full of mould, and toilets outside of the bedrooms, bed sits, dreary outings, net curtains falling off them. And that was the rental. That was your choice, really, to a certain degree, for years and years and years in the city. So there was an incentive by people to get their own home, and it was a thing that was encouraged and actively encouraged by this government in relation to that. So we've also had the situation where government policy in the 70s and 80s actively encouraged people who are renting in local authority housing to buy their home. That was another thing, buy your home, and you're on the ladder then as well. And all these people expected that when they did this, that they'd be able to work away, pay off their mortgage, hit their retirement years, and know how much pension they have to live on, and that they can live within that pension from that point of view. And now what do? you slap a property tax on those people. You slash a home tax on those people after them having an expectant, as you keep saying to us, that high earners on the pensions, all that super pensions, they have an expectant earning. We had an expected earning that we'd be able to retire and have a certain comfort in our own homes. We have our money worked out. Working class people and ordinary people are very, very careful in managing for their later years in life. And now they've been told you're going to have to pay a home tax of 280 to 400 euro a month, and a water tax next year, an assessment most likely, and a broadcasting tax probably the following year. You're talking about an extra 600 to 800 euro per year on the average home. These are people who can barely get along. These are elderly people who are keeping their children going, actually paying for their children's school books and getting them fed and getting them clothed in many instances because of the effects of austerity that your government have carried on from the last government. The Tweedledum, Tweedledee, the Lanigan's Ball politics of you step in again, I step out again, you step in again, different governments, different parties, same policy. Continue on the austerity, continue on hitting on people who can ill afford these attacks. Please give people a bit of relief. A bit of people are saying to me, even if we got some sort of leniency and somewhere along the line that we can actually see, can we find our way out of this situation we're in, and people just don't see it there. We've had young couples then since 2004 or 5, huge stamp duty. I mean, again, made a reference to myself. I've got a mortgage. I didn't buy my home because I haven't. The mortgage's not paid yet. But I got a mortgage of 31 grand on my house in Inchicore. Recently, in the madness of the boom of the Celtic Tiger and all that, it was worth 500 grand. Well, it wasn't worth 500 grand. They've been sold for 500 grand. It was reality. And people, ordinary people, young families that wanted to get onto that property ladder, which they were encouraged actively by government and successive governments, were paying massive stamp duty, and they're being asked to pay this property tax. I met a girl who actually went to the bank. She told me about 4 years ago. She went in for a loan for a car and actually came out with a mortgage for an apartment. That's the way it's been driven. Once you went into that room, you were encouraged, get onto the ladder, this is your opportunity, get your one-bedroom apartment. That girl now is renting that apartment, and she's sitting at home and living with her parents because she cannot afford to pay it, and she's renting it out. And that's the madness that we're going through. And then you are saying that these people have to pay a property tax, a family home tax, and right across the board, and the few ones that you're putting changes to is minimal. It will not have an impact on the people that really need help. 1 out of 4 homes who have mortgages, which you quite rightly pointed out yesterday, are in distress over 90 days. Many are on interest only. They're in debt to their home. They're being told to pay this family home tax. You must be meeting people every day of the week that are in this situation. They cannot see their way to paying this family home tax. You've taken 27 billion out of the economy, not just this government, but partially this government. The Deputy is 1 minute remaining. Okay. You're taking 1 billion out of the pockets of public sector workers, either through trying to railroad them into accepting the cuts they're experiencing, 8% cuts in their income for under 65,000, and 7.9% for those earning over 150,000. Where's the fairness in that? Absolute madness. You're still going after the same people and affecting the same people all the time. So you're taking another 1 billion out of the pockets of those people, of the economy. Sales taxes. We've just seen the figures there today. Over a third of the price of a bottle of wine here goes straight to the taxman. And maybe Eamon Gilmore is doing the taxpayers a favour buying 79,000 bottles of wine that he bought. Some of it's going back to the taxpayer. But that's the tax take that's been taken out of people, out of those things. The figures emerged, and the latest retail sales figures revealed yet another decline in consumer spending in January. People are facing fierce taxes from the point of view of spending in this country, and it's continuously hardening the line of austerity that people are affecting. So, yeah, I think, Minister, you should review exactly what you're doing. It's madness, it's lunacy, and you really are going to stress people out with this.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call on Deputy Claire Daly, who is 7.5 minutes.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. I think, as other speakers have said, the ink is hardly dry on your original piece of legislation, and we're back already with a list of amendments, that will be wholly inadequate to undo the damage and the destruction that's going to be caused by your initial tax. But I think it is a forerunner, really, of the fiasco that this legislation represents, that it was badly thought out, it was rushed through, and it was part of a process that's foisting further taxation onto the shoulders of people who can ill afford it. And clearly, what the bill before us today is an attempt by government to sort of give the illusion of limiting the worst excesses of the bill, deal with the greatest inequities, exclude a few more people, and then try and dress it up as a reflection of dealing with the opposition that's grown to this tax the length and breadth of the country. Well, I have to tell you that intention will be definitely not a chance of that being fulfilled whatsoever, because this tax is already hated and will represent, in my opinion, a turning point in terms of the attitude of ordinary people to the austerity that's been put on their shoulders, not just because they can't afford it, but because of the economic lunacy that it represents. To further attempt to take more taxation out of the pockets of people who are already stressed is not going to serve our economy any good. It's not going to represent a stimulus. It will, in fact, exacerbate the problems that are already there. And one of the things that really gets people's goat is the incredible contrast that this government is using in its treatment of ordinary people and its treatment of wealthy people in our society, because all of the statistics show that those at the top of society have benefited over these difficult number of years, yet middle and lower income families have been absolutely decimated. And this is part of that same process. Probably the most draconian piece of legislation ever put forward is being put forward on homeowners, and meanwhile corporations get away with very light touch situation. The points have already been made in previous answers that you gave. The effective rate of taxation on corporations is about half of the rate that they're levied, an amount which is one of the lowest in Europe in any case. And to meet the deficit and to continue to have us shackled to the debts of private banks and problems that we were never associated with, you've come up with a home tax. Now, I'm not going to repeat the points made by others, but the dogs on the streets know a home is not an asset, it's not a source of wealth. In many instances, it's the biggest headache that people have. And the idea of putting another tax on it, to be honest, is really not the brightest. I suppose I've been fortunate in having the opportunity to go to many meetings around the country on this issue, and I'd echo the points made by other deputies that this is a point of huge concern for people. And one of the most common points you'll hear from older citizens, who tend to be to the forefront actually of a lot of those meetings, is that they spent their whole life putting a roof over their head, providing for their families, and that they would rather do time than see a scenario where they'd be taxed for the right to live in that home, or to have it not been able to be handed over to their children and their grandchildren in the future. I think, just to deal with a number of the amendments that you're proposing in terms of the bill, you know, OK, what you seek to do is lessen the valuation of local authority houses, when in actual fact the call and the amendments that will be posed to you next week is that those properties should be excluded. And if you like, you've sort of exposed the lie yourselves that this has anything to do with local services by levying council properties with that amount of money, because we know that they don't have the money to pay for it. They'll seek to pass it on to their tenants, and even at the lower amount, that won't negate the difficulty in this, and you're only doing it for the first 3 years in any case. So obviously, once they're included in the bill, the intention will be to increase that in the future, which will only exacerbate the problems for local authorities, and particularly exacerbate the problems for their tenants, all of whom are being exposed to excess and increasing rent at the moment. We don't have time to maybe develop all the issues. Obviously, we'll do it next week, but I just wanted to spend some time on the pyrite exemption, because I think this is something, Minister, that if you look at it, you might consider changing before Tuesday. We'll have a long debate then, but why don't you look at this beforehand? When the government lauded the fact that it prepared a pyrite panel, that we had submissions and much involvement. The resounding conclusion of the pyrite panel was that homes which had pyrite should be exempted from the property tax. The Minister for the Environment said that. You said you'd take account of it. What you're doing in this is an illusion. It is not taking account and recognising the difficulty that homeowners with pyrite have. This exemption does not provide that. So if you're genuine in your intention to protect homes with pyrite, then I think you'll heed the call and agree with their amendments on that. You did promise something in that regard. The reality is you're talking about allowing the Minister for the Environment to draft guidelines which will deal with homes which have a significant amount of pyrite damage. Now, the problem is who measures that and who pays for that, and it puts the liability back on the homeowner. There are many instances where homes have tested positive for pyrite, but actually display very little damage at the present time. That damage can appear over time. We have a scenario where impacting on adjoining houses and works done on an adjoining property can have an impact on the house beside it. What is the story? Your guidelines are saying that you've got to refer to the new NSAI standard, but many homeowners have already got tests done which show they've significant amounts of pyritic heave. Are they going to get an exemption based on the tests that they've already paid for? They should. And all of these points, I suppose, pinpoint how the onus has been put back on the homeowner. It's completely unnecessary to do that.
The Deputy has 1 minute remaining.
Simple amendment which includes estates with pyrite as unfinished estates and therefore as of right exempt is the only fair way to do this, because it doesn't matter if your house hasn't displayed signs of damage at the moment. If you're in an estate which has pyrite which has not yet been remediated, then your property is valueless, and the only way of really dealing with that is excluding the estates, and we have given you the simplest way of doing that by allowing the Minister in the list which he has to revise anyway include all of those estates. And if you factor in the amount of revenue that will be forfeited from this, it's actually, to be honest, quite negligible in the overall scale of things. So we can extend the debate next week, but I think that's one that you could certainly concede on. Last point I'll make is that you often hear at meetings people say, I don't know how much the Irish can take. Why aren't we more like the Greeks? Why aren't we more like the French? To me, if you succeed in implementing the draconian legislation that you've put on the statute books and attempt to put the state's paw into the pay packets and the social welfare packets of homeowners, that is actually when you'll really see a start of Irish people becoming more like the Greeks and the French, because they simply will not be able to take it anymore.
Thank you, Deputy. Next slot, Deputy Olivia Mitchell. I believe you're sharing time, Deputy.
I believe I am.
With Deputy Pascal Donoghue, you get 10 minutes each.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thanks.
At the outset, I want to reiterate my deep unhappiness with the method of calculation used to determine liability for the property tax, and I don't think that will come as any surprise to anybody, not least to the Minister, that I believe that, along with many of my colleagues in urban Ireland, that the proposed regime is so unfair to Dubliners and to a lesser extent to Cork dwellers and indeed to those who live in other cities, that it is an unsustainable tax, and that, at least in its current form, it cannot survive the test of time. And I regret that, because I do support a property tax, and I believe if we had had it long ago, we'd never have had the property boom that we had, or at least we wouldn't have had it to the same extent, and we wouldn't be in the state we're in now. But when I look at a situation whereby a person with a similar income and a similar home living in rural Ireland can pay as little as a ninth of what a Dublin person will pay, I think that that's just patently unjust. Now, that would be an extreme case, but certainly it'll only ever be a fraction of what somebody in Dublin will pay in exactly similar circumstances of the size of home and the amount of income. I know the Minister is aware that an essential attribute of a tax is that it should be fair, and this just isn't fair. Arguments that we have better services in Dublin are absolutely true, but they're irrelevant because they are paid for, and we're more than willing to pay for them, but they're paid for out of general taxation. And the taxes raised in Dublin pay for those services, and with whatever surplus that exists, we subvent services in rural Ireland, and that's as it should be. You know, the whole purpose of general taxation is to distribute income. But it's not the purpose of a local tax, and that is my essential point. The argument also used is that we have a more valuable asset here in Dublin, and that's true too. But it doesn't, or certainly isn't a justification for charging more tax. We have our people in Dublin have a more valuable asset because they paid more for it, and they'll continue to pay. And I think this is the important point: they'll continue to pay more for it over the 30 or 40-year mortgage, and that's consequently, they have a less disposable income than their rural counterparts over that period of time. And that's not even to mention those who bought in the last 15 or 20 years who paid very, very high stamp duties. However, I realise that the tax yield expected from this tax is in the budget, and it can't be changed now. But I do, or at least not for 2013, but for 2014, I do want to lay down a marker and ask the Minister to consider amendments to the way the tax actually works and the way it's calculated. What I do want to talk about, however, are the specific measures in the amendment bill, and I largely welcome them. And I want specifically to thank the Minister for responding comprehensively to my representations in respect of homes that were specially adapted for disabled persons, whether they're provided by their families or by benefactors or as a result of court awards. Increasingly, as state provision is becoming increasingly difficult to get for families of severely able to disabled persons, they have had to become more and more innovative in finding solutions themselves, and usually from their own resources, for the long-term residential needs of their sons and daughters and sisters and brothers. And I think it would be unthinkable when families have gone to huge extent to provide the home, that they would also be asked to provide an annual property tax. And I think the Minister has recognised that in giving a complete exemption, and I want to thank him for that. And I know the families would be equally grateful to him. In these cases, a complete exemption is granted. But in cases where existing homes are adapted to accommodate a disabled person, and Deputy Doherty highlighted the problem with this particular case, and to be honest, I'm not sure what the thinking behind it is, and I would ask the Minister maybe to clarify it and think about it again. The explanation is the reduction is limited to the lesser of the chargeable value attributable to the adaptation work carried out on the property, and the maximum grant value under the relevant local authority scheme. That would indicate that your relief, the greater your grant, the greater your relief. And that would make sense if the grant scheme was related to, in any way, to the actual cost of the adaptation. But Deputy Doherty is right in saying that different schemes applied in different local authorities. Some years local authorities had no money and they had no schemes, so people built with no grant. Sometimes they were means tested, sometimes they weren't. It was literally a moving goalpost as far as the grant scheme was concerned. So it doesn't seem to me to be a good basis for deciding the relief now. And incidentally, I should actually declare an interest. I did receive a grant many years ago myself. But I've had endless queries, and that's why I would like to get this clarified. The other issue that arises in respect of this particular relief is it doesn't apply at all, as far as I can gather, for any adaptations done prior to 2001, which I find surprising because the grants after 2001 were extremely generous. In fact, like all problems in those years, the years that followed 2001, they were extremely generous. Money was thrown at every problem. But I remember back in the 80s and 90s, the maximum grant from Dublin County Council was £6,000. I suppose it must have been in those days, £6,000. And families took out huge additional mortgages to accommodate disabled children and disabled family members. Many of those have died since because they, for obvious reasons, but many of them are still alive and still living at home, and it does seem not really very fair that they should be excluded, because there may have been an increase in the value of that property as a result of that adaptation. Although I am of the view that sometimes those adaptations actually reduce the value of the house. So I'd ask the Minister just to have a look at using the grant value as having any relevance in terms of the actual value, increase in value attributable to the adaptation. The other issue I just wanted to raise about renters, and I wonder about the decision to charge the tax to owners of a rented accommodation, including local authorities as owners. I realise from an administrative perspective it's probably cleaner and easier, but I think there's a lot to be said for everybody paying something. In many countries, this is dealt with by way of having a habitation tax or a mixture of a habitation tax and a property tax. But it would avoid, I think, huge resentment that will exist not only in council estates between renters and those who have bought their homes, but in private estates where the councils have bought houses or housing associations are renting out properties. And you have situations where next door neighbours are, you have one paying maybe a substantial sum in property tax and others paying nothing at all. Although I recognise that local authorities will try to pass on some of the cost, but they won't be able to pass on all of it. So actually the cost falls back on the people who are paying. It's also, I think, and maybe this is not an area that gets an awful lot of sympathy, but it is another whammy for owners who are renting out properties, people in the rental sector. It's true, again, they may be able to pass on some of the cost, but generally speaking, I think they are regarded as fair game for any tax. And under the general tax for tax purposes generally, I don't think they are charged, or they're not, I know, treated for tax purposes similarly to all other businesses. And, as a country, I think we need to understand that we need a vibrant rental sector in the country. Even for economic reasons, you need, to encourage mobility of workers. But we will always have people who won't be able to buy and will need to rent, and it suits them to rent. And I think if we had we regarded renting as a normal business rather than as something that's almost regarded as unsavoury and distasteful, we might lose that obsession that we have with owning property, and we might avoid a future property boom.
The deputies, 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. In that case, I better check what is the maybe the snitchers clause. I would ask the Minister about that. Unlike others, I think this is a good idea, to be honest, and I think enforcement is a good idea. I think that all of the measures that have been introduced are highly desirable. There's nothing incenses people more than having, some people getting away with not paying, while those who are tax compliant pay for them. And as I've said, I'd like to change this law, but I don't believe in breaking the law. As long as it is the law, I think it has to be observed. But as far as snitchers are concerned, I agree with it. I think it's in people's interests, if they're buying a house, that they shouldn't compound the error or maybe the deceit that was perpetrated by the previous owner. But I just want to find out from the Minister, will the reverse also apply? In other words, if somebody has erroneously overpaid a tax, will it be refunded when the property or a similar property is sold? It seems only fair that it should, and I'm perfectly sure that it's actually inconceivable that there won't be examples of cases where people find they have overpaid, and I'd say there'll be a long queue of people going to the courts over the years unless it's made clear that there is that it is something that
Thank you, Deputy.
that there would, and I would suggest to the Minister that maybe the time to legislate for that is now. I have a lot more to say, but perhaps I'll keep it for another day.
Another day, yeah. Thank you, Deputy. Sure.
Given the government's very cynical manipulation around this debate and the sabotage really of the democratic process, the very least the government could do is to come in and hear their own bill. So I'd like to call a quorum.
Quorum called.